I'm Emil. Very glad to meet you. This is Lucian. Ben Türkçe biraz konuşabiliyorum ama o kadar iyi konuşmam. Şu anda İngilizce yapacağım şu prezentasyonu. So I'm Emil. I do Google Pay business development in EMEA, and Lucian is the technical brains. I do nothing without him. So whenever there is a partner, I do the business piece. He does the technical piece. So I'll take up around 10 minutes of your time. And I'll leave it all to Lucian afterwards to tell you about Google Pay. I'm not sure if you heard of Google Pay, or if you've seen Google Pay, or if you heard of Android Pay before, so I'm going to cover that for you and just provide you some generic information, and then you'll jump into the code with Lucian here. Let me see how it works. Yeah. Okay, so I'll go through the overview now for you to understand Google Pay. I just like this thing. So 10 billion, how much is that? Around 54 billion Turkish lira. This is the Turkey e-commerce retail e-commerce sales in 2017. This is a huge, huge number, and this number is actually supposed to grow to 17 billion by 2021. And this is a big, big, huge number, and the number that we all are looking into. Google overall IT market. Everyone is interested in about in this in the retail. But the conversion is still a big problem. So we see at Google, we see it with our partners, with our merchants, that conversion is a really, really big problem. And we understand that this problem needs to be solved. Actually, in the last years, the conversion rates have either stalled or even decreased, so went down. And we see this figure globally. So imagine this step of going through the checkout process. You have to fill in your data, you have to either create a payment profile or create an account. Then you have to remember this all information, fill this out, and in the end you have to create the payment information to just do one order. And we see that around 28%, around 30% of users are actually abandoning the cart because of this issue. I myself personally hate filling out those forms, and I try to avoid it maximum in my life. If I have a chance of not doing that, I'll not do that. But yeah, this is not only me. And this is the current checkout experience, the standard checkout experience looks like. I know why our designers did just one shoe over there, but let it be like this. So this is the current checkout experience that we have overall on the market. This might be in-app, this might be website, and we understand that this is a problem that is causing a lot of issues both on the partner side and on the Google side, as we're behind advertising. So we're bringing you clients, and those clients are leaving you. And what we're aiming to get with Google Pay is actually get to this. So this is the current checkout process in Airbnb. So this literally takes you a couple of clicks, and the whole process happens in the backend right away. So Google Pay API does everything behind the ears of the user. So it gathers your account. You can choose between your accounts. You can choose each card of the account that you have, and the payment happens in the backend right away, seamlessly, fast, and easy for the user. So that's what we're aiming for. And GPay is actually visible to users already. So you might be seeing it in YouTube already when you're buying some movies or you're buying a YouTube Music subscription. You are seeing that in Chrome. Actually, when you're using Chrome and Google is offering you to save your card, if you're using Chrome to buy something and Google is offering you to save your card, this is Google Pay as well. So those cards that are prompted to be saved, they are saved into your Google account. And in Google Play, you see Google Pay as a backend to saving your card data as well. But we're not stopping there. We're actually going further, and we're working for the partners, because we understand that we are a small portion of the market, and we understand that the market is actually way bigger. It's the issuers, the banks that issue the cards, and these are the merchants that actually acquire the payments. So as you can see, Rich Messaging app, which lets you accept payments as well. Google Assistant, or Google Home, which actually also works with Google Pay. So when you've done the Google Pay integration and you want to go into Google Assistant integration, you will have the ability to integrate payments, which we call Transactions API, as well there. And accelerated mobile pages, I think you should know what that is. Those are also accepting the payments. So this is like one side of our own products that we're building Google Pay into, but we're actually, my whole goal overall is to spread Google Pay across merchants in EMEA, and we're seeing tremendous growth right now. As you have seen, Airbnb is one example on the app. So, for example, Airbnb has made an integration in their app, and the integration is showing the Google Pay in their app. But we're not stopping there, actually. Google Pay is actually available on all browsers and all systems right now, be it iOS or Android, be it desktop or mobile, and be it Windows, Mac or Linux. So this is what we've done recently. I think it was announced earlier in the beginning of this year, and just one integration with Google Pay will give you the ability to use Google Pay on the website, in mobile, on desktop, in any device. And this will even work in Safari browser on iOS. The only place we can't work right now is inside iOS apps, which is kind of obvious why. These are the brands, like some of the brands. These are just the brands from Europe. We're not showing here US cases. These are the brands from Europe that are live now. You actually can see Hepsiburada here. These guys launched earlier this year with their app. And we are actually expanding. Every day we are receiving a lot of requests from merchants, and we are launching a lot of merchants in EMEA. And actually EMEA is a very, very big market for us. We see huge potential. And let me just jump to why it might be interesting to you, and then I'll hand it over to Lucian. So, what is Google Pay? Google Pay lets users save payment information in their account and use it afterwards. Imagine user using Google Play to buy an app or music or a movie. The card is saved there. Imagine him buying something on YouTube or using Chrome to buy something online. Google prompts him to save his card into his account, and those are billions and billions of users globally that are doing that. So the hundreds and hundreds of millions of cards from billions of users globally are saved into Google Pay for the future use. So with one integration for you, you will be able to let all those users with Google Pay cards in their accounts, in the Google Pay accounts, pay right away on your website, mobile or desktop, or inside your app. And this will not only work in Turkey. So imagine you're selling goods here and, for example, in Russia. You will be able to sell right away with one integration in 60+ countries right now. This is a very easy and smooth transition for you across the borders, and it's a very easy and convenient and fast and secure way for the user to pay online. So I'll stop there on my side, on the kind of overall story side. We'll be there actually in the GPay booth, which was empty the whole day. Sorry about that. We'll be there if you want to ask any more questions. I'll be your POC if you want to launch, and Lucian here will guide you through the coding and technical piece of the presentation.
Cool. How does this work?
Just down.
One button. How does it work? Talking to partners, I think there's a bit of confusion on how Google Pay actually works. So I put some slides together to explain that to you, and then we'll go through a quick implementation, although I'm not going to write any code, because although I could probably write some meaningful code in 10 minutes, I'm not entirely sure what you're going to get out of it. But there's two ways of doing it. You either go via gateway or you go direct. What's the difference? The difference is basically if you go to a gateway, pretty much all the work is done for you. You just basically pass the payment information, they do the payment, you get the confirmation, done. If you choose to go direct, then you basically do the whole decryption yourself, and then you pass the payment information to different banks or payment or gateways for them to do the payment for you, and then obviously you get the response and you display that to the user. We have lots of partners, gateways, more and more joining every day, and actually if you work with any of these guys, you're ready to go. If you don't work with any of them, by all means tell your gateway, your processor, hey, integrate with Google Pay, because we could then just go live literally in a few hours if it needs to be. So how does it work at an API level? I mean, first thing on a client side, and client side could be a website, could be an app, could be a bit of both. You just initialize the API, and once you initialize the API, you ask the very important question, is the user ready to pay? And why do you do that? So the whole point, as Emil said, is to speed up the checkout. So you don't want the user to be in a position, well, I don't have a Google account, I don't have a card to it, so that won't make it better for them. By asking the question, is it ready to pay? Then you get a response saying, yeah, the user is ready to pay and just go and do it, or not. When you ask this question, basically you send something like that to us. And as you could see, there's a few parameters, and I'm going to go around them, but pretty much you put some constraints. I mean, is the user ready to pay with these? You know, a card, maybe Amex, yes or no? And you know, we're going to look at that and basically tell you, yes, the user is ready to pay. And literally, that's what you're going to get from this call, a true or a false. And what you do if you get a true, typically you will display a Google Pay button. Now, there's a whole debate, should you display a Google Pay button if the user is not ready to pay? And the question is, it's kind of up to you. I mean, it won't do any harm. The user will click on it, will be asked to log in, will be asked to add a card, and you know, if you want that to happen, fine. Otherwise, you could just not display the button and just display it every time the user is ready to pay. But once you do that, then the user could click on it and literally start the payment process, and that's the UI that they're going to get. And the UI is fairly consistent on mobile phones, on web, everything. And out of that UI, I mean, what you're going to send to us in order to display it, some similar parameters that you've seen before. More importantly, you get parameters such as, you know, give me a shipping address, and I could limit that shipping address to various geographies if I want to. That's the price of the transaction, and I'll cover a bit more about that. But once you send that, basically what we're going to do is we're going to send you back the payment details encrypted with the gateway public key. Remember that, that's important. And some unencrypted details. And the blob that you get back looks a bit like this. And the red stuff is the encrypted. So by implementing Google Pay via gateway, you'll never ever get any credit card information from the customer. So all you get is some details. You could say, hey, it was a MasterCard. Those are the 4 last digits. You could display it nicely on the screen. But the actual payment information is hidden. You also get some other information that you could use, for example, to calculate the shipping costs to an order. You could register an account for Mr. 007 here. But you know, once you get that information, all you have to do is basically send that information back to your backend, and from there, still encrypted all the way to your gateway. They'll do the payment on your behalf, respond typically with a yes or no, and you're done. Now, I think that makes sense, but what a lot of people don't particularly realize is, as you could see on this flow, we actually don't know if the payment went through. And why I mentioned that? Because there is this idea that, hey, you know, Google's going to know what I bought when. We probably know, but not from here. From here, all we know is at some point you asked to make a payment to this merchant for about that amount of money. That's it. We don't know if you went ahead, if you canceled, if it was successful, if your card got declined. There is no communication between the gateway and ourselves. So we don't capture this information. And you know why we're doing all this service is to actually make life easier. Because if we make life easier, you'll probably use more products and so on. There's some logic to it. It's not just because of that, but we don't capture information. Now, what happens if you choose to go direct? Direct is pretty much the same, except for the fact that now you have the private key and you decrypt it. And then you could send that information back to your gateway, to your bank. And the question is, okay, why shouldn't I do that? Because then I have the credit card information. I could get the user to be a bit more stickier. Because you need to be PCI compliant. So if you are PCI compliant, then you have a choice. I could go direct, I could go via gateway. But that implies that your servers are certified, you have a current certificate, and all that. So this is, in a nutshell, how it's working. So in short, you get a button, you click on it, you get some payment information that can be decrypted either by yourself or by a gateway. So when it comes down to implementation, there's pretty much 3 steps. You initialize the Google Pay library. And when you do that, you basically configure various constraints, authentication, card networks, things like that. You ask if the user is ready to pay. And based on that, you choose to show the Google button or not. And then you just create a payment data request. And what you'll get back is all the payment information. You send that back. And the gateway will tell you if it's successful or not. The bit in gray basically could be some work done in your backend. And one thing I want to mention is typically if you work with the payment, with the payment gateway, you already have some API in the background working with them. So if they support Google Pay, typically that's an extra parameter where you pass that token. So in 90% of the cases, I'd say there is no additional work on your backend in order to support Google Pay. It's just adding a button on the front end. And that's pretty much what I'm going to cover in the implementation. Now, the plan. Initially I thought, well, yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about code and then just go and put a button and show you how it's working. But we would do typically that if we had a longer workshop, because then I could stop and explain each individual piece of code. But I'm just going to show you code and mention those components, those parameters. And I'm going to do it for both web and Android. And hopefully, if you have then additional questions, as Emil said, we'll be over there at the booth waiting for your questions. But on the web is as simple as adding a link to a JavaScript file. Please never ever cache that on your servers, because then you won't have the latest version. We discovered that people tend to do that and then complain that everything is broken. On Android, for an application, it gets slightly more complicated if you want. You have to change your build process, and you have to add something to the manifest. Now, I've highlighted the fact that we're using Play services, and that's important because if the phone doesn't support Play services, Google Pay doesn't work, which means that you're out of luck if you do payments in China, for example. But otherwise, if the Google device has services, it's all good. The Google Pay application is actually a wrapper around these services. So even if the user doesn't have Google Pay installed, they could still pay using Google Pay, if that makes sense. And then you configure this library to point to an environment, which could be either test or production. And to go in test, you could just do it tomorrow. You go home. You could go and play with it in test. The API is public. No questions asked. I'll just mention that in order to test in test environment, you still have to have a real card. So you have to add your real card to your Google Pay account. But when you do a payment, the token that you get, that encrypted data, contains actually a dummy data. So you still use a real card, but in test you get the test data. When you are about to move to production, your code doesn't change except this parameter test or environment test if you are on Android. But you'll have to go through a whitelisting process on our behalf where we're going to check if everything works and looks as expected. Then you specify how do you want to do it, direct or via gateway. If you do via gateway, you'll probably have a gateway ID. That's typically, I don't know, Stripe. They have a name. And the gateway merchant ID is whatever ID they give to you. So they need to know who you are. So you'll have an ID with them. That's the ID you supply over there. If you go direct, then there is no gateway. You'll have to supply a public key. Now, this public key is actually, again, you generate. We have all the instructions. You generate a pair of public and private key. You hold on to the private one, and you send this in every request. However, when you go to production, you have to give a copy of this, so then we could make sure that it's you making the call. Same thing in Android with slightly more lines of code. But once you do that, then you pretty much specify what you're accepting. And the only thing I'm going to mention here is obviously we support all the credit card networks, but you have to make sure that you accept, or your gateway provider supports all the above. But the other one is slightly more interesting because we support cards on file or tokenized cards. What's the difference? A card on file is any card that you use, for example, to go into Google Play Store, or you've added via Chrome autofill. It's basically a credit card number. That's PAN only, card on file we call it. Cryptogram 3DS is when you actually add a card to Google Pay, and then that card you could go and pay contactless. Is that supported in Turkey? Not yet. But with that one, what's happening is we actually store a token, which is issued by a token provider, and that token is used instead of the card. That token could only live, as it stands, on a mobile device. So what's happening then is, why should I do a Cryptogram 3DS, for example, if I only have a website? Because if I go with an Android phone on the mobile web, and if I have a tokenized card, I could use that on the web. So it's not that, oh, I'm an app, I'm going to use only cards on file. Use them both if you can. Same thing for Android. And then you're ready to basically make the call. Are you ready to pay? And as you could see here, we kind of putting all the objects together to build this message that you've seen before. So that's the message that you pass on to us. You're going to get a response. Everything is asynchronous, so your UI doesn't stall. If the user saying is ready to pay, then all you have to do is just display the button. Same with Android. And buttons. Now, buttons are important. Are important because we have some serious branding guidelines. I put some URLs here. But if you don't respect those, we're going to say no, try again. Because we want our brand to be reflected in the right way. So the buttons have to have a certain size, a certain color. If it's a darker environment, use white buttons and so on. Everything is described. The two things here, I mean, we're working to add additional verbs here. So currently it's just buy with Google Pay. We're going to have pay with Google Pay, book with Google Pay, things like that. Because from time to time, we got this feedback is like, I'm not buying a hotel room. I want to book a hotel room. So that's going to make sense. The other bit is they come in quite a few languages, especially if you're using a web, it's automatically translated for you. On Android, you actually get the bundle with all this, and we keep adding more languages as we go along. But yeah, branding guidelines are important. To make your life easier, on the web there's a function showing the button. It's very simple. You just basically append the button, and everything is taken care of, including localization and so on. You could specify if you want a small or a large button. On Android, like I said, you basically have to build it. It's just a button, you put an image, and you have a bit more control. So now you have the button, the user is ready to pay. You want to make a transaction. So apart from the fields that we've seen previously, we're adding the final, the price and some additional information. Now the price. This is kind of interesting because we don't use this for anything but to make sure that there's not something fishy going on like a fraud. So, if you're basically going to say that on this website you want to charge about €1,000, we might wonder why, because, something's not right. Same goes for currency. So these two values you just supply to us, and we're going to make a call on them. But the price status appears final, but from time to time there are instances when you could basically say, I actually don't know, because the user has all these values in the basket, but I don't know how much the shipping is going to be. So instead of final, you could specify estimate. And this applies in some other instances, like if you're going to estimate a cab ride or things like that. So what I'm trying to say here is the price is important, but not that important. Don't try to necessarily convert or have a currency conversion where you just say, oh, it has to be exact. It's for our information in terms of fraud. And same thing for Android. Now, then you send the request to us, and you get basically a confirmation. Now, that confirmation is what you've seen previously. So this is what you sent, and you get the big blob. And a lot of fields here, as you could see, the sort of allowed payment methods and so on is kind of combined. So both requests have the same structure. So when you send that on to us, you're going to get a result back, which could be user has cancelled or anything. But typically you'll get that big blob of encrypted data, and all you have to do is just basically send it your gateway way, or if you're doing direct, you have to decrypt it on your backend. And here I have the same code for Android, and basically, you know, in the end, this payment data request object that we move around is this JSON that goes to our servers. Now, literally, this is all the code that you have to have implemented in order to support Google Pay, especially if you have a gateway provider. That's it. And as you could see, you know, this could be easily done in a few hours. We actually have these lunchathons in different markets where we have merchants, and they are ready to go live in about 4 hours. So it is easy to implement. And now and then I go onto a website where, let's say, I want to buy some tickets for some museum, and they ask me to fill on that form, and just don't want to do this because it's simple, it's easy, it doesn't take much to do. So, you know, I'm not going to go into the code too much, because obviously, you know, it would be nice for you to play, but, you know, on Android you get a bit more handling of the response in terms of what was the result. So that's kind of from us. We will be outside taking questions, answering any questions you may have, but feel free to get in touch. Everything is public, everything is live. Just go play, and, you know, happy paying. Thank you.
Thank you.